The wagon creaked like bone beneath skin, crawling across the plains under a sky the color of spent ash. Dust clung to everything: her boots, her breath, the rough rope biting into her wrists. She couldn't see, not with the burlap sack pulled over her head, but she could smell the heat, the horses, the sharp tang of rust and sweat. And she could hear every bounce of the wheels, every bored grunt from the men up front. They hadn't spoken to her since the station. No need. She was freight, not company. Someone they were paid to deliver. Not one had asked her name. She didn't cry. That had dried up days ago. What lived in her now wasn't sorrow, it was quieter. Harder. Like something calcified behind her ribs. The wagon slowed. She heard voices ahead. Laughter. Boots scraping gravel. The sound of a bell, dull and heavy, rung not for faith, but for business. A sale. They tugged her out roughly, feet stumbling on hard-packed ground. Someone yanked the sack just enough to check her face, then pulled it back down. "She ain't built for field work," one man muttered. "Hands like a teacher's." "She's soft," another added. "Probably never split wood in her life." They laughed, and she kept her silence like armor. Then the call went out, "Next." Hands gripped her arms. She was led forward, stumbled, caught herself, then dropped to her knees in the dust. Her heartbeat made the rope at her wrists twitch. The auctioneer's voice was all bark and business. Female. No papers. Found alone by the tracks. No husband. No claim. Weak in the wrists. Likely can't lift a shovel. A pause. "2 silver, anyone?" Silence. A cough. "She's barely worth the rope she's tied with." A scoff. Spit hit the ground nearby. One man chuckled. "Should have left her at the station." Then. "That's my cousin." A voice from the crowd. Calm. Flat. "I said, that's my cousin. I'll take her." A shuffle of feet. Someone cursed under their breath. The auctioneer peered into the faces. "You?" Boots approached. Heavy, measured steps. She couldn't see who, but the way the others quieted told her enough. He wasn't young. He wasn't loud. But he wasn't to be ignored. He tossed 2 coins to the ground. "Don't overprice the useless," he muttered. The auctioneer grunted. "Take her then. But don't bring her back." Hands reached down, not rough this time, and lifted her gently. The sack came off. Light hit her like a slap. She blinked hard. The man stood there. Dust on his coat. Hat low. Eyes steady, unreadable. "You all right to walk?" he asked. She didn't answer. Just nodded. "Then let's go." And with that, they walked away while the rest turned back to the business of weighing flesh. They didn't speak on the road. Not because there was nothing to say, but because the weight of what had already happened filled the air between them like dust. He led the mare by its reins, slow and steady, while she sat behind the saddle, wrapped in the coat he'd handed her. It smelled of cedar and iron, simple things that didn't ask questions. The town receded behind them, swallowed by horizon and heat. No one followed. No one called out. She glanced back only once and then kept her eyes forward. She didn't know where they were going, but she didn't ask. She'd learned long ago that questions didn't change outcomes. They passed through dry gullies and the long hush of sun-baked meadows. A crow shadowed them for a time, its wings slicing the sky. Her wrist still bore marks from the rope. Her skin itched where the sack had rubbed raw. But she didn't speak of it. Pain had become a quiet companion, never gone, just waiting. By late afternoon they reached a small hollow where pine trees leaned in close, as if trying to keep secrets. There, tucked low against the slope, stood a cabin. Not much to it: one window, a porch just wide enough for 2 boots and a rocking chair, but the roof was intact and the hinges didn't cry out when he opened the door. He stepped aside, gesturing her in without touching her. She crossed the threshold like someone who expected the floor to fall away. Inside, it was cooler. Dim, the walls smelled of charred wood and dried herbs. A cot stood near the far corner, its blanket neatly folded. A kettle hung over cold ashes in the hearth. The table held a crust of bread and a knife with a wooden handle worn smooth. He set his bag down by the door, then pulled another bedroll from a crate and placed it near the fireplace. "You'll be safe here," he said. That was all. She stood there a moment longer, unsure whether she'd been offered sanctuary or something harder to define. He didn't explain. He moved to the small window, checked the latch, then sat down on the chair by the door like he meant to stay awake. She took the cot. Laid down without removing her boots. Watched him through the fading light. He didn't look at her. Didn't seem to need to. When she closed her eyes, it wasn't sleep that came. It was the strange absence of fear. Later, she awoke to find him still seated, one boot crossed over the other, arms folded. The fire hadn't been lit. The dark wrapped the room like a second skin. Outside, the wind combed through the trees, whispering things in a language older than memory. She turned her face to the wall and let her breath slow. The man didn't move. Neither did she. By morning, the world had shifted. Not much. Just enough to notice. He was outside splitting wood. She watched from the doorway, arms crossed, unsure if she was meant to join him. He caught her gaze, gave the faintest nod, then returned to his work. No demand. No welcome. Just space. She sat on the porch, hands in her lap, eyes following the rhythm of his axe. She didn't know his name. He hadn't asked hers. But somehow that didn't feel like a wound. Not yet. Days passed without shape. Morning came with the sound of axe against stump, the rustle of pine needles under boots. Evening settled quietly, drawn in by the creak of the porch chair and the smell of coffee that wasn't quite bitter enough to wake the bones. She didn't speak unless necessary. Neither did he. But silence had begun to take a new shape, not the kind that weighs down, but the kind that makes space to breathe. She began to notice the things he didn't say. The way he folded his coat with care each night. The way he poured 2 cups of coffee even before he knew if she was coming to the table. There were no questions. No why or where from. The unspoken truth between them was simple: whatever came before didn't matter here. At least not yet. One morning, she found a loaf of bread already wrapped in cloth, left quietly on the table. No note. No gesture of offering. Just presence. She started helping in small ways. Gathering wood. Washing the tin cups. Sweeping dust from corners that hadn't known care in some time. Not out of duty or debt. Simply because motion kept her from thinking too long about the stillness. He noticed, but didn't comment. When she carried in the wood, he made space for it. When she stoked the fire, he only moved his chair back a little, giving her room. It was an odd kind of rhythm, separate but shared. She caught herself watching him sometimes. The way his hands moved when he repaired a latch or brushed down the mare. There was nothing hurried in him. No sharpness. Just quiet purpose. A man who had long ago learned to live with the company of his own thoughts. He never asked her what had been done to her. Never asked who she'd waited for at the station. Never asked if she believed in anything anymore. And because of that, she began strangely to trust him. There was a moment, late one night, when they were both still awake, though neither acknowledged it. The fire was low. Shadows danced on the cabin walls. She spoke, not looking at him. "I haven't had a name in a long time." He didn't turn his head, didn't act surprised. Just said, "You don't owe me one." And that was the end of it. But not the end of something else. She slept better that night. Not well. But better. When morning came, she rose before him. The kettle was cold. The sky outside was just beginning to shift from gray to gold. She stepped outside barefoot, letting the ground meet her without permission. The wind carried the scent of wet pine. The world, for once, didn't feel like it was closing in. She didn't know what that meant. But she held on to it anyway. By the second week, her hands had calluses again. Not the kind left by rope, but those made from labor that chose her back, splitting roots, shaping bread, scraping earth. She didn't think of it as healing. Healing was for wounds you could name. This was something quieter. Less clean. It lived in how she moved now, slower, firmer, closer to the ground. He gave her a small plot near the east fence. Never said what to plant. Just left a pouch of seeds on the windowsill one morning. Inside carrots, beans, something that smelled faintly of mint. No explanation. Just trust. She knelt in the soil without knowing if anything would take. Her palms darkened. Nails filled with dirt. The ache in her knees became familiar, almost welcome. The land didn't care who she was. It only asked consistency. Water. Time. That afternoon, he fixed the gate while she marked the rows. She didn't speak. He didn't offer advice. But when a gust of wind nearly took her hat, he caught it without looking up and set it back on the step beside her. A quiet gesture, so small it would have been invisible had she not been watching. In the evenings, they shared meals without ceremony. Sometimes stew. Sometimes only bread and what they could find in the root cellar. He poured water. She passed salt. It was enough. One night she caught him staring out the window long after the dishes were cleared. Not with longing. Not with grief. More like a man remembering something that no longer hurt, but never quite left. She didn't ask. And he didn't speak. But she sat beside the fire that night longer than usual, letting the silence between them hold what words would only scatter. By now, she rose before him each morning. Tended the garden. Boiled water. Folded blankets without being told. Not to repay anything. Just because it felt right. There was no deal between them. No promise spoken. And yet, something was being built, slow and unannounced. Like roots under frost. Like breath drawn before a name. And though she still didn't know what lay ahead, the soil on her hands, the steam in her cup, and the steadiness of his footsteps told her some things, once planted, will try to grow. Even here. She hadn't been looking for anything. Just dusting the shelf near the window, same as she had the morning before. Her fingers moved without urgency. But the drawer stuck slightly, catching where it hadn't before. She tugged it open and there it was. Folded once, not sealed. A corner curled. Paper that had seen hands, maybe regret. She told herself not to read it, that it wasn't hers. But the words had already found her. If you find this, it means I couldn't wait any longer. I tried. I did. I hope you find peace. There was no name. No address. Just the tight slant of ink written in a hurry. Her thumb brushed the edge of the page like it might still be warm. She put it back where she found it. Closed the drawer slowly. But something in the air had shifted like a door cracked in the back of the mind. She looked at him differently after that. Not with suspicion. With recognition. That night, when he came in from chopping wood, she watched the way he shook sawdust from his sleeves. The way he moved slower as the sun dropped behind the ridge. A man carrying something he hadn't named aloud. He didn't see her looking. Or maybe he did, and just let it be. He was at the hearth when he finally spoke. They died in a flood. His voice was low. Not fragile. Just settled. Years back. A long way from here. I stayed in the house after. Too long, maybe. Long enough for it to stop sounding like theirs. She didn't interrupt. He wasn't telling it for her. He was letting it out like old smoke. I came here after. Built this place myself. Didn't want ghosts, only wood. She didn't offer comfort. Didn't need to. Her silence said enough. Said, I know that kind of leaving. The next morning, she brought in the wood before he asked. Baked bread without him watching. Planted more rows in the garden without waiting for sun. And when she passed him the coffee, her fingers brushed his not by accident, but not entirely by design either. He didn't pull away. And in that moment, the letter no longer felt like a goodbye. It felt like the beginning of something neither of them could name yet. It was on a morning when the air felt still, like the sky itself was holding its breath. He had gone down to the creek, as he often did, to wash the dust from his arms and let the silence of the water settle him. She followed, not because he asked, but because something in her needed to know how far the quiet between them could stretch. They didn't speak as they walked. The path curled through long grass and cottonwood, leaves whispering high above. The ground was soft beneath her steps. Her skirts brushed wild mint and something unnamed that left its scent on her palms. At the edge of the creek, he stepped in. Rolled up his sleeves. Let the current wrap his forearms and pull away whatever the morning had brought with it. She sat on a flat stone nearby, watching him as the sun caught in the water. And then, without looking at him, she asked, Why did you say I was your cousin? A pause. A long one. Only the creek spoke. Because no one else did, he said. She waited. But he didn't offer more. Not at first. Then, you looked like someone who needed not to be stared at anymore. So I gave them something they could accept. And a price they couldn't argue with. He cupped water in his hands and splashed it over his face. The sound broke gently in the air. You didn't have to. I know. That was it. He stepped out of the water, shook his arms, let the sun dry his skin. No heroics. No explanations that begged for thanks. Just facts, clean and worn like river stones. She watched him a while longer, then stood and followed him back. But something inside her had shifted like a floorboard that stopped creaking, or a knot that finally gave in to time. She didn't feel saved. She felt seen. And it was almost more than she knew what to do with. Spring arrived in pieces. Not as a season that declared itself, but as quiet shifts she began to notice, a softening in the ground, the way frost lingered only at the edges, the creak of the cabin roof easing in the afternoon sun. She rose before the sky brightened now. Stoked the fire. Checked the garden. The shoots were thin but stubborn, pressing up through the soil like they knew this place might still hurt them and grew anyway. He watched her sometimes, from the porch, sipping coffee with his sleeves rolled. He didn't tell her how to do it. Just nodded when she tied the beans along twine or when she lined stones around the beds to keep rabbits out. They worked like a pair who had known each other longer than they had wordless, but aligned. There was laughter now. Not often. And never loud. But real. She found herself humming while sweeping or peeling root vegetables, melodies with no names, just rhythm. Once she caught him standing in the doorway, listening. He didn't say anything, only adjusted his hat and stepped outside. But something in his shoulders told her he'd smile before the door closed. One afternoon, Thunder curled in from the west. They moved without needing to speak. He brought in the horses, she shuttered the windows. Rain came hard, slanting across the valley, filling the yard with the smell of wet bark and broken earth. They sat by the fire, side by side. No books, no tasks. Just warmth. She turned to him then. Asked, low, why didn't you flinch? That day, in the dust? He looked at the flames a moment before answering. Because I've seen too many men look away from what needed helping. I didn't want to be one more. She held that answer like something living. It didn't ask her to feel anything. But she did. That night, when the storm passed, she lay down and didn't shake. She dreamed of green things. And still water. And a voice that didn't ask anything, only stayed. The end of summer arrived not with ceremony, but with sound. Hooves in dry dirt. A name one she hadn't heard aloud in months echoed across the field like something clawing its way back from the grave. She dropped the basket of apples. Her fingers went numb. The voice had changed deeper, more polished, but she knew it. The one who had written the letter. Promised hearth and home. Then never came. He rode into the valley with two others. Men who looked like they never had to ask for anything twice. The kind who weighed every face like a threat or a prize. The rifles on their saddles weren't slung for show. She didn't run. Didn't scream. Just turned and walked into the cabin. Closed the door. Locked it once. Slowly. The man at the hearth was already reaching for his coat. His movements weren't rushed. Just sure. He looked at her only once, and in that glance, everything was said. She nodded. It's him. He stepped out alone. The riders were already dismounting. Dust still settled around their boots. The stranger, the one from her past, wore finer clothes now. Silver buttons, polished boots. But the same hollowness lived behind his eyes. A pride built on absence. She's mine, he said. The quiet man didn't flinch. No. A laugh, hard and splintered. She was promised. I paid for her passage. She left with nothing. She still owes me that. She owes no one, came the answer. Least of all you. One of the others shifted. A hand near a belt. No words. Just warning. You married her? The stranger barked. Is that what you told them back in town? I did. So you lied. No. I chose her. That stopped everything. The wind, the dust, even the nerves behind her ribs. The stranger's voice dropped. She's not yours to keep. And from the porch, the quiet man's voice rose, not loud, but unshakable. She's not a thing. He stepped down. You left her like freight. Let them tie a sack over her head. Now you want to drag her back like a prize? What makes you think you deserve her? I don't. But I never asked her to be less than she is. The silence after cracked like thunder. Inside, she stood. Straightened her spine. Then opened the door. She didn't wait for permission. She walked past the threshold, past the man who'd stayed. And faced the one who hadn't. I don't belong to you, she said. His jaw worked. You were bought. I was abandoned. He stepped forward. You don't get to choose. I already did. She didn't raise her voice. She didn't need to. And the one beside her, the man who had never asked for thanks, stood without speaking. But everything about his presence said, she does not stand alone. The dust took them. The three riders disappeared into the hills as if they'd never mattered at all. Only their shadows lingered for a breath, and even that passed. She stood in the yard, the sun warming her shoulders, the cabin at her back. And in front of her, the man who hadn't left. He didn't speak. Didn't ask if she was all right. He just looked at her like always with that quiet steadiness that didn't press or pretend. "I don't have a last name anymore," she said. He nodded slowly. "You can have mine." She smiled. It wasn't wide. It wasn't soft. It was real. "Not yet." And he nodded again. Not hurt. Not hurried. Just ready. They went inside. The smell of apples baking filled the air, warm and close. She set another log on the fire. He filled the kettle. Their movements had the ease of something built, not promised, not owed. Just built. She took his hand. This time, not to be held. Just to hold. Outside, the wind moved through the pines like breath. The earth was damp where the hooves had torn it. But her garden still stood. The shoots were taller. The rows straight. That night, they didn't speak of what had happened. They didn't have to. She lay beside the fire and listened to him breathe. And when she finally closed her eyes, she wasn't waiting for anything to go wrong. Because some kinds of love don't come with thunder or declarations. Some kinds grow slow. Quiet. Like moss between stones. The kind that stays. Dear friends, if this story meant something to you, if it reminded you that quiet strength still matters, then leave a like and subscribe. It helps this channel grow. And it keeps stories like hers alive. Not loud, not grand, but real. To everyone walking this road with me, thank you. You're not forgotten. Stay brave. Stay gentle. And remember, some stories aren't told to entertain. They're told so we never disappear. Until next time.